What if I told you that a group of farmers, merchants, and ordinary people once stood up against the most powerful empire on earth, and won? This is the untold story of the American Revolution, a story of courage, sacrifice, and the birth of a nation. Stay with us as we take you back over 2 centuries, to the war that changed the world. The American Revolution, lasting from 1775 to 1783, was one of the most significant and transformative events in world history. It marked the rise of the United States of America as an independent nation and introduced powerful new ideas about liberty, government, and human rights. To understand the depth of this revolution, it is necessary to explore the political, economic, and social conditions that existed before the war, the steps that led to open rebellion, and the first major events that shaped the course of history. In the mid-18th century, Britain controlled 13 colonies on the eastern coast of North America. These colonies had been established for various reasons, such as seeking religious freedom, escaping poverty, and expanding economic opportunities. Each colony developed its own unique culture and political system, but all were subject to British rule. Initially, relations between Britain and the colonies were peaceful and cooperative. The colonies supplied Britain with raw materials and markets for finished goods, while Britain provided military protection and access to trade networks. However, over time, tensions began to rise as Britain sought greater control and revenue from its colonies. One of the primary causes of this tension was the aftermath of the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, known in North America as the French and Indian War. Britain emerged victorious, but the war left the British government with a massive debt. To help pay this debt and to maintain British troops stationed in America, Parliament passed a series of tax laws that deeply angered the colonists. The first significant tax was the Stamp Act of 1765, which required colonists to purchase official stamps for printed materials such as newspapers, legal documents, and licenses. Colonists viewed this as a direct attempt by Britain to raise revenue without their consent. They argued that because they had no representatives in the British Parliament, such taxation was unconstitutional. This gave rise to the powerful slogan, "No taxation without representation." In protest, colonists organized boycotts of British goods, held public demonstrations, and even engaged in violent resistance. Groups such as the Sons of Liberty, led by figures like Samuel Adams, played a major role in mobilizing public opinion against British policies. Though the Stamp Act was eventually repealed due to intense colonial opposition, Britain soon imposed new taxes through the Townshend Acts of 1767. These acts placed duties on imported goods, including glass, paint, paper, and tea. Colonists again responded with boycotts and protests, further straining relations. Tensions escalated into violence on March 5, 1770, with the Boston Massacre, where British soldiers opened fire on a crowd, killing 5 colonists. Though the incident was heavily propagandized by revolutionary leaders, it revealed the growing hostility and mistrust between Britain and the colonies. The conflict reached a boiling point with the Tea Act of 1773. This law granted the British East India Company exclusive rights to sell tea directly to the colonies at a lower price but still included a tax. Colonists saw it as an attempt to force them to accept taxation without representation. In response, members of the Sons of Liberty disguised themselves as Native Americans and staged the Boston Tea Party on December 16, 1773, dumping 342 chests of British tea into Boston Harbor. Britain retaliated with a series of harsh measures known as the Coercive Acts, or Intolerable Acts, in 1774. These laws closed Boston Harbor, restricted town meetings, and allowed British officials accused of crimes to be tried in Britain rather than in the colonies. The acts effectively stripped Massachusetts of self-governance and were intended to punish the colony for its defiance. Instead, they united the colonies in opposition. The colonies convened the First Continental Congress in September 1774 to coordinate their response. Delegates from 12 colonies met in Philadelphia to draft a petition to King George III, demanding the repeal of the Intolerable Acts. At the same time, they began organizing militias and stockpiling weapons in preparation for possible armed conflict. Open warfare finally erupted on April 19, 1775, at the battles of Lexington and Concord. British troops marched from Boston to seize colonial weapons stored in Concord, but they were met by colonial militia. The brief but fierce skirmishes resulted in casualties on both sides and marked the official start of the American Revolutionary War. News of the battle spread quickly, galvanizing support for the revolutionary cause across the colonies. Following the outbreak of hostilities, the colonies convened the Second Continental Congress in May 1775. This assembly took on the responsibilities of a national government, authorizing the creation of a Continental Army and appointing George Washington as its commander-in-chief. Washington, a respected military leader from Virginia, would become a central figure in the Revolution, known for his perseverance, strategic vision, and leadership. At this stage, many colonists still hoped for reconciliation with Britain. However, as fighting continued and Britain showed no sign of compromise, calls for independence grew louder. Influential pamphlets such as Common Sense, by Thomas Paine argued that it was illogical for a small island across the ocean to rule an entire continent. Paine's powerful writing persuaded many undecided colonists to support full independence. On July 2, 1776, the Continental Congress voted to declare independence, and 2 days later, on July 4, they officially adopted the Declaration of Independence, written primarily by Thomas Jefferson. This document eloquently stated that all men are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It listed the many grievances against King George III, portraying him as a tyrant unfit to rule a free people. By signing the declaration, the colonies formally broke away from Britain and transformed the conflict into a war for independence. This decision carried enormous risks. Britain was one of the most powerful military forces in the world, with a strong navy and well-trained army. The colonies, by contrast, had a relatively small, inexperienced military and limited resources. However, they had key advantages, including familiarity with the local terrain, widespread popular support, and, as the war progressed, the possibility of foreign assistance. The early years of the war were marked by both victories and setbacks. The Continental Army initially struggled to match the British in open battle. Washington's forces suffered defeats in New York and New Jersey in 1776 but rebounded with surprise victories at Trenton and Princeton, which boosted morale and kept the revolutionary cause alive. These campaigns demonstrated Washington's ability to use unconventional strategies to outmaneuver a superior foe. The war took a major turn in 1777 with the American victory at the Battle of Saratoga in New York. This victory convinced France that the American cause was viable, leading to a formal alliance in 1778. French support provided troops, naval power, and critical supplies, significantly increasing the Americans' chances of success. Spain and the Netherlands would later join as well, turning the conflict into a broader global struggle against Britain. After the Declaration of Independence in July 1776, the American Revolution entered a new and more dangerous phase. What had begun as protests and limited skirmishes had now transformed into a full-scale war for independence. The stakes were higher than ever. If the revolution failed, its leaders would likely face execution for treason, and the colonies would suffer even harsher British control. The war would prove to be long, brutal, and full of unexpected turns, testing the determination of the American people and their leaders. Early military challenges and strategic shifts. Despite the enthusiasm following independence, the Continental Army faced enormous difficulties. Most of its soldiers were farmers and tradesmen with little military experience. Supplies such as weapons, ammunition, and food were often scarce. Meanwhile, Britain commanded one of the most powerful military forces in the world, with a professional army and the Royal Navy, which controlled the seas. In late 1776, British General William Howe launched a campaign to capture New York City, aiming to isolate New England from the other colonies. Washington's forces suffered heavy defeats at the Battle of Long Island and other engagements, forcing them to retreat across New Jersey. Morale in the Continental Army dropped, and many feared the revolution might collapse within months of its start. However, Washington understood the value of morale and surprise. On the night of December 25, 1776, he led a daring crossing of the ice-filled Delaware River to attack Hessian mercenaries, German troops hired by the British, stationed at Trenton. The surprise victory at Trenton, followed by another at Princeton, revitalized the revolutionary cause and proved that the Continental Army could challenge British forces under the right conditions. The turning point, Battle of Saratoga. The year 1777 brought a critical shift. The British planned to cut off New England from the other colonies by controlling the Hudson River Valley. General John Burgoyne's army marched south from Canada but became bogged down in the wilderness of upstate New York. American forces, led by Generals Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold, engaged Burgoyne's troops in a series of battles near Saratoga. The American victory there in October 1777 forced Burgoyne to surrender his entire army of nearly 6,000 men. The victory at Saratoga was a turning point because it convinced France to openly support the American cause. The French had secretly provided supplies earlier but were hesitant to commit fully until they were sure the Americans could win. After Saratoga, France signed a formal alliance in 1778, bringing with it not only supplies but also troops, naval forces, and military expertise. This globalized the conflict and dramatically increased pressure on Britain, which now faced war not only in America but also in Europe, the Caribbean, and Asia. Winter at Valley Forge. While diplomacy achieved a major success, conditions on the ground remained harsh. During the winter of 1777 to 1778, Washington's army camped at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Soldiers suffered from freezing weather, disease, and lack of food and clothing. Nearly 2,500 men died during that winter, and morale sank to dangerous levels, yet, Valley Forge became a symbol of endurance and transformation. Baron Friedrich von Steuben, a Prussian military officer, arrived to train the soldiers in modern military tactics. His drilling and training turned the Continental Army into a far more professional and disciplined fighting force, capable of standing up to the British in conventional battles. The war in the South. B. 1778, Britain shifted its focus to the southern colonies, believing that loyalist support there would help them regain control. The British captured Savannah, Georgia, in late 1778 and Charleston, South Carolina, in 1780, dealing severe blows to American forces. They also scored victories at battles such as Camden, forcing the Americans to retreat. However, guerrilla warfare and local militia resistance disrupted British plans. Leaders like Francis Marion, known as the Swamp Fox, conducted hit-and-run attacks, while General Nathanael Greene reorganized American forces in the South. Greene's strategy was not to win decisive battles but to weaken the British by constant harassment and avoiding unnecessary losses. This approach culminated in key battles like the Battle of Cowpens, January 1781, where American forces, using clever tactics, decisively defeated a British detachment under Banastre Tarleton. Another significant battle was at Guilford Courthouse, March 1781, where British forces technically won but suffered heavy casualties, further straining their resources. International dimensions of the war. The American Revolution was no longer just a war between Britain and its colonies. France's entry forced Britain to fight on multiple fronts, including naval battles in the Atlantic and Caribbean. In 1779, Spain also declared war on Britain, seeking to regain territories lost earlier. The Netherlands joined the anti-British coalition in 1780. This expansion of the conflict drained British resources and reduced their ability to focus entirely on suppressing the rebellion in America. The French Navy played a decisive role in disrupting British supply lines and challenging their naval dominance. French troops also joined American forces in several campaigns, further tipping the balance. This international involvement demonstrated how global politics could shape the outcome of local conflicts. Benedict Arnold's treason. One of the most dramatic episodes of the war was the treason of Benedict Arnold, a former American hero who switched sides. Arnold had been a brave and talented officer but felt unappreciated and angry at being passed over for promotions. In 1780, he plotted to surrender the American fort at West Point to the British in exchange for money and a high rank in the British Army. His plan was discovered, and Arnold fled to British lines. Though the plot failed, it shocked the American public and became a symbol of betrayal. The final campaign, Yorktown. By 1781, the war had reached a critical stage. British General Charles Cornwallis moved his army to Yorktown, Virginia, hoping to maintain a strong position near the coast for resupply by the Royal Navy. However, American and French forces quickly moved to trap him. Washington, seizing the opportunity, marched his army south from New York while French forces under General Rochambeau joined him. Meanwhile, the French Navy under Admiral de Grasse defeated the British fleet at the Battle of the Chesapeake, preventing Cornwallis from escaping or receiving reinforcements. The siege of Yorktown began in September 1781. American and French troops surrounded Cornwallis's position, digging trenches and bombarding British defenses. After weeks of heavy fighting and realizing that no rescue was coming, Cornwallis surrendered on October 19, 1781. This effectively ended major combat operations in the American Revolution. After Cornwallis's surrender at Yorktown in 1781, the major fighting in the American Revolution came to an end, but the war was not officially over. Skirmishes and naval battles continued for a time, and both sides prepared for the possibility of renewed campaigns. However, political changes in Britain shifted momentum toward peace. Many in Britain had grown tired of the costly war, especially as global conflicts with France, Spain, and the Netherlands stretched their resources thin. The British Parliament began to question whether holding on to the American colonies was worth the expense. Negotiations to end the war began in Paris in 1782. The American delegation included Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay, men known for their diplomatic skill and commitment to securing favorable terms. France, Spain, and the Netherlands also had interests in the negotiations, but the Americans sought to secure their own peace treaty directly with Britain. This was partly to ensure independence without being overly dependent on French interests. On September 3, 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, officially ending the war. Its key provisions included: Britain recognized the independence of the United States, the boundaries of the new nation were set, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River, and from Canada in the north to Spanish Florida in the south. Americans were granted fishing rights off the coast of Newfoundland and in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Debts owed by Americans to British merchants would be honored. Property confiscated from loyalists during the war was to be returned. For Americans, the treaty represented a stunning success. Not only had they secured independence, but they had also gained vast new territories, giving the young nation room to expand westward. For Britain, it was a bitter defeat, but one tempered by the opportunity to rebuild relations and trade with the new nation in the future. Building a new nation. Winning the war was only the first challenge, building a stable government and society was the next. The colonies had united to fight a common enemy, but they were still 13 separate states with different interests, cultures, and economies. During the war, the Articles of Confederation had been adopted as the first constitution of the United States. However, this system created a weak central government with limited powers. Congress could not levy taxes or regulate trade effectively, and major decisions required the approval of all states. While the Articles helped guide the nation through war, it became clear afterward that a stronger national framework was needed. This realization eventually led to the Constitutional Convention of 1787, where leaders such as George Washington, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton drafted the United States Constitution, creating a stronger federal government with checks and balances among executive, legislative, and judicial branches. This new constitution, ratified in 1789, remains the foundation of American government to this day. Social changes and challenges. The Revolution also had deep social impacts. The idea that all men are created equal inspired debates about liberty and equality. However, these ideals were not applied equally to all groups. Many women had taken on new roles during the war, managing farms, businesses, and even serving as nurses or spies. Figures like Molly Pitcher became legendary. Despite their contributions, women gained few legal rights after the war, but their efforts planted seeds for future women's rights movements. Slavery, the contradiction between fighting for liberty while maintaining slavery became apparent. Some northern states began gradual emancipation, and the abolitionist movement gained early momentum. In the South, however, slavery remained deeply entrenched, setting the stage for future conflicts. Native Americans. Many Native American tribes had sided with Britain, hoping to stop American expansion into their lands. After the war, they faced increasing pressure as settlers moved westward. The new United States did little to protect their territories, leading to decades of conflict. Loyalists, approximately 60,000 loyalists, who had supported Britain, fled to Canada, the Caribbean, or Britain itself. Those who stayed often faced hostility and property loss. Despite the treaty's call for restitution, economic impact, the war disrupted trade and left the nation with significant debt. Inflation soared during the conflict, and many soldiers returned home to find their farms or businesses struggling. However, independence opened opportunities for new trade relationships, particularly with countries outside the British Empire. Over time, the U.S. economy began to recover, and land in the West attracted settlers seeking new opportunities. Influence on the world. The American Revolution's impact extended far beyond the borders of the United States. It demonstrated that colonies could successfully challenge a major European power and inspired revolutionary movements around the world. France. The American Revolution directly influenced the French Revolution, 1789, as French soldiers and officers who fought in America, such as Marquis de Lafayette, carried revolutionary ideals back home, Latin America. Leaders like Simón Bolívar drew inspiration from the American struggle for independence in their own fights against Spanish rule. Europe. Monarchies across Europe feared similar uprisings, while reformers and intellectuals embraced the ideas of liberty and republicanism that had triumphed in America. George Washington and leadership legacy. George Washington emerged from the war as a national hero, admired for his leadership, integrity, and ability to unite diverse groups of people. When the new Constitution was adopted, Washington was unanimously elected the first President of the United States in 1789. His presidency helped solidify many traditions and principles that would define the nation, such as peaceful transfers of power and the importance of civic virtue. The Revolution's enduring legacy. The American Revolution was more than a war, it was the birth of a nation built on ideals of liberty, democracy, and individual rights. While not all of its promises were fulfilled immediately, it created a framework for progress and debate that continues to this day. Its success showed the power of ordinary people to shape their destiny and establish the United States as a symbol of freedom worldwide. The revolution also left behind challenges, conflicts over slavery, the rights of women and minorities, and the treatment of Native Americans, that would take generations to address. Yet its influence on political thought, human rights, and global history is undeniable. The principles articulated in the Declaration of Independence and embodied in the U.S. Constitution have inspired countless movements seeking justice and equality across the globe. Soldiers' life during the war. Life for soldiers during the American Revolution was extremely harsh and challenging, especially for those in the Continental Army. Unlike the professional British soldiers, many American recruits were farmers, craftsmen, and ordinary citizens who volunteered or were recruited to fight. Their motivation was often a combination of patriotism, community loyalty, and sometimes financial need. Living conditions. Soldiers often lived in makeshift camps, where tents or hastily built huts served as shelter. These camps lacked basic sanitation, leading to frequent outbreaks of disease such as dysentery, smallpox, and typhus. During winters, such as the infamous winter at Valley Forge, 1777 to 1778, soldiers faced freezing temperatures, insufficient clothing, and food shortages. Many lacked proper shoes, resulting in frostbite and severe illness. Despite these hardships, soldiers endured, motivated by camaraderie and the cause of independence. Rations and supplies. Food rations typically included salted meat, hardtack, a dry biscuit, peas, beans, and sometimes bread when flour was available. Supplies were inconsistent due to poor transportation infrastructure and limited resources. The British Army, with its established supply lines, often enjoyed better provisions, but they also suffered when local resources were scarce. Pay and discipline. Continental soldiers were promised pay, but delays were common due to the financial struggles of the Continental Congress. Some soldiers went months without wages. Discipline varied, with punishments for desertion or misconduct ranging from whipping to execution. Despite these hardships, many soldiers stayed in service, demonstrating strong resilience. Women and camp followers. Women also played vital roles by following the army as nurses, cooks, and laundresses. Some, like Mary Ludwig Hayes, famously known as Molly Pitcher, even took up arms in battle when their husbands fell. These women were essential for maintaining morale and ensuring soldiers had basic care. Espionage and intelligence. Espionage played a critical role in the American Revolution. Both the British and the Americans operated spy networks to gather information and mislead the enemy, American spies. One of the most famous spy networks was the Culper Ring, organized by Major Benjamin Talmadge under orders from George Washington. Operating primarily in New York, which was occupied by the British, the Culper Ring provided intelligence on troop movements, supply lines, and British strategies. Their work was crucial in giving Washington the information needed to plan military campaigns effectively. Another well-known figure was Nathan Hale, a young officer captured and executed by the British in 1776. His last words, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country," became legendary. British intelligence. The British also employed spies and informants, particularly among loyalists who supported British rule. They attempted to infiltrate American camps and spread misinformation. The betrayal of Benedict Arnold, who planned to hand over West Point to the British, was partly the result of British intelligence operations. Lesser-known battles and skirmishes. While famous battles like Saratoga and Yorktown dominate historical narratives, many smaller engagements significantly influenced the war. Battle of Oriskany, 1777, a brutal battle in upstate New York, notable for its high casualty rate and the involvement of Native American forces. Battle of Kings Mountain, 1780, a turning point in the Southern Campaign, where American frontiersmen defeated Loyalist troops, weakening British influence in the Carolinas. Battle of Cowpens, 1781, a clever tactical victory for American General Daniel Morgan, boosting morale and crippling a key British unit. Naval skirmishes. Though small compared to Britain's navy, American privateers captured hundreds of British merchant ships, disrupting trade and supply lines. John Paul Jones became a naval hero, famously declaring, "I have not yet begun to fight." These smaller battles, along with constant guerrilla warfare, exhausted British resources and morale, showing that even without massive victories, persistence could wear down a stronger opponent. Economic struggles during the war. The war severely disrupted economic life in America. British blockades reduced trade, and many cities, especially ports, suffered declines in commerce. Inflation skyrocketed as the Continental Congress printed large amounts of paper money, known as Continentals, which quickly lost value. Impact on farmers. Farmers faced a difficult choice: sell crops to the struggling Continental Army for depreciating currency or sell to British forces, who could pay in gold. Many chose the latter, leading to accusations of treason and divided loyalties. Industrial challenges. The colonies had limited manufacturing capacity, making it difficult to produce weapons, uniforms, and other supplies. The war stimulated some domestic industries, but shortages were common, and prices were high. Loyalists and property confiscation. Economic division also occurred because loyalists often had their property seized and sold to fund the war effort. After the war, some loyalists who fled were never compensated, despite treaty promises, foreign aid and loans. Financial support from France, Spain, and the Netherlands helped keep the revolutionary cause alive. Loans and grants from these countries, as well as credit from private financiers like Robert Morris, were critical in sustaining the war effort. Morale and propaganda. Maintaining morale was essential for both sides. Newspapers, pamphlets, and speeches played crucial roles in shaping public opinion. Writers like Thomas Paine boosted morale with works such as The American Crisis, which began with the famous words, "These are the times that try men's souls." Such writings reminded Americans of the importance of perseverance during difficult times. Conclusion of Part 4. The American Revolution was not only fought on battlefields but also in spy rings, economic systems, and the hearts of ordinary people enduring extraordinary hardships. The story of soldiers, camp followers, spies, and civilians shows the war was truly a people's war, involving everyone, not just generals and politicians. America after independence, 1783 to 1789, the Treaty of Paris, 1783, officially ended the war and recognized the United States as an independent nation. However, winning the war was only the beginning. Building a stable and effective government became the next challenge. Political structure. Under the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation, adopted during the war, created a loose union of states with a weak central government. Congress could make laws but had no power to tax or regulate interstate commerce. This meant the government often lacked funds, and decisions required the approval of all 13 states, making swift action difficult. Economic challenges. The war had left the economy in shambles. Inflation was high, trade had been disrupted, and debt, both domestic and foreign, was substantial. Farmers, in particular, suffered from falling crop prices and heavy taxes imposed by states to pay off debts. Many veterans returned home to find themselves unable to pay mortgages or taxes. Shays' Rebellion, 1786–1787. Economic hardship sparked unrest, most famously in Massachusetts, where Daniel Shays, a former soldier, led a rebellion against high taxes and foreclosures. Though quickly suppressed, Shays' Rebellion exposed the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation and increased calls for a stronger federal government. The U.S. Constitution and new government, 1787–1789, recognizing the need for change, delegates from 12 states met at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787. Key achievements of the convention: separation of powers. The Constitution created 3 branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial, each with checks and balances to prevent tyranny. Federalism. Power was divided between the national government and states. Bill of Rights, though added later in 1791, these first 10 amendments guaranteed individual liberties, such as freedom of speech and religion. The Constitution was ratified by all states by 1789, and it became the supreme law of the land, replacing the Articles of Confederation. George Washington's presidency, 1789–1797. George Washington, revered as the hero of the Revolution, was unanimously elected as the first President of the United States in 1789. Establishing the executive branch, Washington set important precedents, including creating a cabinet of advisors and serving only 2 terms. His leadership emphasized neutrality, unity, and civic virtue. Domestic policies. Economic reforms. Under Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, the government assumed state debts, established a national bank, and created tariffs to encourage industry. Whiskey Rebellion, 1794. When farmers protested a tax on whiskey, Washington personally led troops to enforce the law, proving that the federal government had real authority. Foreign policy. Washington adopted a policy of neutrality, avoiding entanglement in European conflicts despite pressure to support revolutionary France against Britain. His farewell address warned against permanent alliances and political parties, advice that influenced U.S. policy for decades. The Adams presidency and political divisions, 1797–1801. John Adams, Washington's vice president, became the second president. His term was marked by increasing political division between Federalists, favored strong central government and close ties with Britain. Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, advocated for states' rights and support for France. Quasi-war with France, 1798–1800. Naval conflicts erupted with France due to disagreements over treaties and trade, though war was never officially declared. Adams eventually negotiated peace, which hurt him politically but prevented a full-scale conflict. Alien and Sedition Acts. These controversial laws, aimed at suppressing dissent, restricted freedom of speech and targeted immigrants. They fueled opposition and helped Jefferson win the presidency in 1800. Social and cultural changes. The Revolution's ideals continued to influence society. Expansion of education, literacy rates rose, and new universities were founded to prepare leaders for the republic. Role of women. While women gained no formal rights, the concept of Republican motherhood emerged, encouraging women to educate their children in civic virtues. Slavery. The contradiction of liberty and slavery persisted. Northern states gradually abolished slavery, while the South expanded its plantation economy, setting the stage for future conflict. Religion. There was a movement toward separation of church and state, though religious belief remained strong. Westward expansion. With Britain's recognition of U.S. borders extending to the Mississippi River, settlers quickly moved westward. This created opportunities but also tensions. Native Americans. Many tribes resisted U.S. expansion, leading to conflicts such as the Northwest Indian War, 1785–1795. Land ordinances. The government passed laws to survey and sell western lands, laying the foundation for future states. Legacy of the American Revolution. The American Revolution fundamentally changed political thought worldwide. It proved that colonies could overthrow a major empire and establish a functioning republic. Its core ideals, liberty, equality, and democracy, influenced revolutions and reform movements across Europe and Latin America. Key legacies: democracy and republicanism. The U.S. became a model for representative government, human rights. Documents like the Declaration of Independence inspired human rights movements globally. Global shift of power. The revolution marked the beginning of Britain's gradual loss of its first empire and reshaped global trade and alliances. The story of the American Revolution is not just about battles and treaties. It is the story of ordinary farmers, merchants, mothers, and soldiers who stood together and dared to dream of freedom. It is about leaders who risked everything, from their wealth to their very lives, for a vision of a free and independent nation, from the cold nights at Valley Forge to the victory at Yorktown, from the signing of the Declaration of Independence to the creation of a new constitution. This revolution changed not only America but the entire world. It inspired countless people across continents to rise up for liberty, equality, and self-rule, but the revolution was also imperfect. Many promises of equality remained unfulfilled, leaving struggles for civil rights, women's rights, and justice to future generations. And yet, the foundation it created, a nation built on the idea that power comes from the people, remains one of its greatest achievements. Today, more than 2 centuries later, the American Revolution still reminds us of one simple truth: freedom is never free, and every generation must protect and cherish it. This was not just America's story, it became the story of the modern world.